She said that parenting is a learning process. And that is absolutely on point. It is an absolute learning process. But the problem is, once you learn how to deal with a 2-year-old, they become a 3-year-old, and it's a learning process all over again. So that parenting is a dynamic learning process. It continues and it changes, and we always have to be aware that what worked yesterday may or may not work today. So it requires us, it challenges us to be as flexible and as observant and as able to, switch gears as our kids are. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is we all want better behavior from our kids, but what is a realistic expectation we can have from our kids? Because some of us expect too much. Some of us think that because a kid did it once, they're going to do it all the time. So first of all, what are young children? Young children are immature, they are impulsive, they want attention, sometimes more than anything else, and they are driven by curiosity, incredible curiosity that is not bounded by logic or reason. We can't expect them to understand everything we say to them because they don't. They might seem that they understand, especially when you get your 4- and 5-year-olds and older children. They act as if they understand because they know that this is expected of them. But in reality, they understand on their own immature, childish level. They're not understanding everything on the same adult, mature level that we think that we're conveying it on. They're not getting it that way. And what they don't understand, they cannot see value in. So to begin with, we're starting with a difference in communication skills, a difference in comprehension skills. Number 2, they are in the process of maturing toward self-control. They're not there yet. They are in the process. They do not like to have to follow directions from other people. They like to be self-directed, self-directed and do what they want. And somebody said this, that one of the problems is that my child, your child, wants to do everything immediately, immediate gratification. Yeah, that's it. That's what kids are about. That's why our job as parents is to help them develop the self-control, to help them learn how to wait. And that comes next, to help them do all those things that will enable us to have a better relationship. So, when we talk about self-control, I used to drive up and down Highland Boulevard every morning and every evening, back and forth. And I have to say that I see a lot of adults that are lacking in self-control. So when we talk about realistic expectations for our children, self-control is one of those things that it's always a process. We're always gaining a little bit more self-control because self-control comes with experience and maturity. So let's be on alert that maybe what we think our kids can do is a little more than they can actually do on a consistent, predictable basis. So number 3, what are children? Young children are developing the ability to wait, to stop, to share, to listen. Depending on their age, they are in a different stage of this development, but they don't know how to wait. Waiting is one of the hardest things for a young child. Stopping is one of the hardest things for a young child. And we have to have a little compassion and understanding about this and not expect them to all of a sudden be able to wait. I like to say, I've got a whole thing about waiting games. And I'll give you one of my favorite waiting games. Cooking, making toast. Have your child stand right next to you while you wait for the toast to get toasted. And you can say to your child, we're waiting, and it's really hard to wait for that toast when you're hungry. But you are learning how to wait. This is a waiting game. And when the toast finally pops, forget about the toast. It's your child saying, you did it, my precious child. You waited for that toast to pop. Isn't that terrific? It's a waiting game. Don't rush through those circumstances, those situations where your child is forced to wait. Instead, bring attention to it and point out to your child, this is what waiting is about, and it's hard, but you're learning and you can do it. All right, that's for the waiting. These are part of executive functioning skills that we're going to get to in another one of these workshops, these Saturday Zooms. So what else do we know about young children? We know that they are learning things that we don't even know we had to ever learn. What are some of these things? How about for a very young infant, what is day and what is night? And what is the sun and what is the moon? And for an older child, who can I trust? What do I really like to do other than get my parents' attention? Why can't I bark like the dog? I'm going to try and see if I can bark the dog.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dolores. I'm so sorry. Just because you're still the host, I think there's some people at the door. Can you please just see who might be there to let them in? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Interrupt whenever you can. I'm going to find out how I can let them in. As I said, this is the first time I'm doing Zoom on my phone, and I'm not familiar with it. I cannot find the waiting room. Hold it. I had the ability a little while. I let several people in before.
Okay. So I just heard actually from Jen. I just heard from Jen, and she said to just continue. She said there's no one at the door right now. So I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
All right. Okay.
Sorry.
We were talking about children and what they're learning that we don't even remember ever having to learn. Children are like sponges. You've heard that saying, I'm sure. Children are like sponges. They absorb everything they see. They absorb everything they hear. They absorb everything from you, their parents. You are, for better or for worse, the most important models in your child's life. Teachers are important, yes, but you surpass them in importance. They are imitating everything they see. They want to try it on. They want to try on attitudes. They want to try a new vocabulary, sometimes the vocabulary that you wish that they never had heard. And they're going to try it on for size. Why? Because they want to see how you're going to respond to it. They're going to see if this is the vocabulary words that you approve of and will give them attention for. So these are what we can really expect from our children: to be inappropriate, to not be able to wait, to be immature, to be children. Now, I had a beautiful slide that I wanted to put up there for you. Unfortunately, it'll be on the website, guys. So it should be on the website, so you should see all these slides. But the slide says, discipline says, I'll teach you how to do it right. Punishment says, I'll make you regret for doing it wrong. So we're going to talk a little bit about punishment and about discipline and the differences between the two, and why one is important and should be used and the other one should be eliminated. So what is punishment? Basically, punishment deals with negative past behavior. It has little or no teaching of alternate acceptable behaviors to help a child self-regulate, self-control, self-discipline. It doesn't do that. It makes the child depend on external means for controlling his or her behavior. Punishment can teach a child to avoid rather than accept responsibility. There's no learning of options, no learning of choices, and definitely no learning of responsibility. It can be arbitrary. There's very little, if any, connection between the behavior and the consequence. It's arbitrary. You've done this misbehavior, child, so you're not going to watch television for the rest of the evening, or whatever. There's no connection. And if there is no connection, there is no learning. And without learning that your actions have a consequence, why should I bother not doing it? It can lead a child, and I'm sure that many of your kids are already in this situation. It can lead a child to expect negative attention, and that being their goal, to attract your negative attention, rather than learning what is right and what is wrong. Now, what is discipline? We're talking about discipline as a teaching modality. It is based on teaching. The word discipline comes from the root word to teach. And what does it teach? It teaches behavior. It teaches standards, the standards we want for our children. It teaches values, and it teaches what you expect from a child. So let's go back to the original slide. Punishment says, I'm going to make you regret doing it wrong. Discipline says, I'll teach you how to do it right. So it's based on teaching. It tells a child what that child should be doing rather than what should not be doing. Now, we all do this. We all do this. Don't run. Don't hit. Don't scream. Well, there are a lot of choices you leave me with. If you tell me don't scream, I've got a lot of vocalizations that I could try. But if you say, you can speak quietly, it's very definitive. It's teaching a child what you expect. And if instead of saying don't run, because they can hip hop, they can roll around the floor, they can do any number of activities. If you just say don't run. But if we tell them what we want them to do, you can walk carefully when we're inside. When we go outside, you can do your running. It's a change of attitude. It's a change of how the child is receiving your instructions. A child can obey a positive instruction. You can walk much more than a negative directive. Don't run. So remember this when you're talking with your child. And if you get it wrong the first time, you say don't run, you got a do-over. You always have a do-over. Listen, what I really meant was you can walk when you're inside, or you could tiptoe, or you could take baby steps. The number of choices is infinite. Discipline, as opposed to punishment, deals with the here and now. What are we going to do now? What is possible for the future? What can I expect you to do in the future? What can I teach you how can I teach you how to behave in an acceptable way for the future? And discipline teaches responsibility, that actions have consequences. Now, I work with a lot of older children, elementary and high school kids. And what I hear a lot, what I've heard for a number of years is when one child acts in an aggressive way towards another child and you confront that child, the response will be, it's not my fault. He or she made me do it. Now, this is the ultimate refusal of accepting responsibility. This is blaming. And we live in a society that prefers to blame rather than accept responsibility. We want our children not to blame, but to accept responsibility because they grow and they learn in that way. We want to teach them that when they do something, there is going to be a consequence. When they don't come to dinner, they may miss out on dinner. They may miss out on our company. When they don't follow our rules, there's going to be a consequence. Not an arbitrary consequence, but something that follows logically from what they did or did not do. If a child consistently fights with a sibling, you can't play with your sibling anymore. Simple. That's a consequence. You either play with your sibling, your brother, your sister, whatever, in an appropriate way, and I'll define what appropriate means. That means you speak normally, you speak kindly to each other, you keep your hands on your own body, and you play cooperatively. Because don't expect the child to know what you mean when you say play nicely or play appropriately. Define it. The younger the child, the more it has to be defined. So discipline is also recognizing good behavior, catching the child being good. This is a catchphrase that I read everywhere. Catch the child being good. You look up discipline anywhere, it's going to tell you catch the child being good, because that is where you want the child to direct his or her attention. Now let's talk a little bit about compliance versus independence. Compliance is an adult's need, and non-compliance for an adult means disrespect. And I hear a lot of parents telling me that my child is disrespecting me and I cannot tolerate that. I will not have disrespect in my house. And I said, well, let's work on it. Let's work on it, because this is an unrealistic demand for a child. Am I still seeing you? Okay, you've got the PowerPoint up. You got it up. Very good. Okay. So what does a child need? A child needs independence. And what is non-compliance for a child? It is independence. So when you expect a child to comply, it means that a child, you are saying that the child is going to be helpless. Is going to have feelings of helplessness and dependency. A child's desire for independence is a child's desire to have some kind of empowerment in their life. So what do we say about compliance versus independence? Don't personalize the behavior. A child is just being a child. They're not disrespecting. The term disrespect is not even in their lexicon. So even if they know the word, they do not comprehend what that word really means. So let's not personalize a child's behavior. Frankly, young children are so entirely egocentric that you almost do not matter. It's always about them. It's always about them. And I'll say that again. For a young child, it's always about them, not about you. So deal with that behavior in an objective way. Think about it objectively, not personally, not that it's a disrespectful action towards you, not that it has anything to do with you, but it has to do with the child exploring his or her environment to see what is possible and what is not possible. So deal with the behavior objectively and be effective in those areas that you can control, and just try to ignore whatever you can ignore. I'm going to talk a little about this later on. So the goal, what is the goal in all this? The goal is to get the child to manage his or her thoughts and feelings more effectively. The goal is not to have a child obey blindly. This is a terrible thing. Now you're dealing with your young child in your home, but picture this young child as a teenager. Do you still want your teenager to blindly obey anyone in authority, anyone who says what they should do, who gives them suggestions on what they should be doing? You don't. You want your child to be able to think and evaluate independently. So don't expect blind obedience. Expect to help that child manage their own feelings and thoughts. Why? Why do we want to do this? Because then that child will become more respectful and will lead to more appropriate actions and behaviors. Okay, we've got the next slide up. We're not ready for that slide yet, but it's nice to know that that's there. I will say again, do not take on the child's emotional reactions. And why do I say this? Because we always do. Child is angry, we get angrier. Child is sad, we get sadder. We stop being that guideline. We stop being the rock of stability that our children can depend on. We start joining their emotional instability instead. So I say to you, do not take on the child's emotional reactions. Hold fast and commiserate and sympathize and empathize, but don't take on those feelings. Now, what happens when we are dealing with behavior is, more often than not, we're dealing with the symptoms, not the underlying causes of the behavior. So this is a challenge that goes on forever. We see the behavior, we see the symptom of what's underlying. Child is jumping on the sofa. That's bad behavior, that's misbehavior. And we've told the child dozens of times, do not jump on the sofa, and the child insists on jumping on the sofa. So we keep dealing with that behavior, which is really the symptom of the underlying cause, which is, how do I get my mother? How do I get my father? How do I get my teacher? How do I get my sibling? How do I get anybody to pay any attention to me? Well, I know that I've been very successful in the past when I jump on the sofa. So here I go, I'm jumping on the sofa. So if the child's real need is for attention, then try to give it to the child in a way that's acceptable to you. Next slide, if you can, please, Karen. Can we do the next slide? Okay. What we deal with here is normal rebellious behavior, which is how we, and the twos and the teens, very, very similar. Testing out their environment, testing out who they are within their environment. Normal rebellious behavior is not a challenge to your authority. I repeat, it is not a challenge to your authority. It confirms your authority. And it shows the child's extreme frustration and feelings of helplessness at having to comply. Child's need, as I said before, is for independence and autonomy. Compliance is not something they want to do, but they are frustrated and they act out because they know that that is the only power that they have. So don't think that when you're seeing normal rebellious behavior in your child, that is a challenge. It is a confirmation to your authority. And the fact that the child knows you are always in charge. Okay, let's go to the 4 behaviors. Next slide. Next slide.
Saying anything. Oh,
Okay, we're getting there.
the blank
We're
screen.
getting there. 4 behaviors. I like to break down behaviors into 4 categories. Here we go, 4 behaviors. The first, just press your space bar, it'll come up. There we go. The first is the ideal. The ideal behavior. Oh, if we only lived in an ideal world. I'm going to use as an example a 4-year-old. A 4-year-old getting up in the morning and going to school. We can remember those days, can't we, parents? When the child used to get up in the morning and go to school. Okay, those are the good old days. Now, let's deal with the ideal. The ideal situation for that 4-year-old is you walk into the room and you say, "Sweetie pie, it's time to get up for school." And the child says to you, "Oh, goody, 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 I'm so happy. I'm going to get right up and get dressed. Mom, you don't have to help me. I will dress myself." Okay. So that happens to more or less that degree. And then the child comes out and you have a bowl of cold cereal and milk on the table waiting as breakfast. "Oh, Mom, I love cold cereal." "Or Dad, I thank you for giving me cold cereal. I'm going to eat it all up because it's my favorite breakfast of all time. And now that I've finished, don't you worry. I'm going to put my plate in the sink and I'm going to clean up the table for you because I know that that's what you want me to do. And now I'm going to go brush my teeth because I want to get ready for school." Sounds like your kid? Does this sound like your kid? No, okay. And then I'm going to wait by the door with my lunchbox in hand and put my coat on and go out and get the school bus. "Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad." Okay. Has anybody ever seen that behavior? No, you haven't. I'll answer that for you. You haven't, because that's ideal behavior. So let's deal with acceptable behavior, because that's the next category. Acceptable behavior is getting the child up. "I don't want to get up. Why do I have to get up?" But the child gets up. You manage to get the child up. And the breakfast, "Oh, Mom, why did you make cold cereal? I don't want any cold cereal. I really wish you had made pancakes, but I'll eat some of it anyway." And leaves the bowl on the table, and you have to remind them to brush the teeth, and the teeth get brushed, and the lunchbox gets taken, jacket gets put on, and they're out the door and onto the school bus. That's acceptable behavior. Let's talk about neutral behavior. That same scenario. You get the child up in the morning. Child says, "Oh, I hate school. I hate school. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to get up." And you're ignoring that behavior as you're lifting the child up and keeping that conversation. "Well, you know, today is Tuesday and you're going to have a special lunch. Mommy made you this for lunch and I'm going to be here when you come." And you just talk the child through it. And you did not engage in that negative behavior. And you go to the breakfast table, and the breakfast table is still the same bowl of cold cereal and milk. And the child says, "But I hate cold cereal. I hate it. And you promised me that you'd make waffles. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to eat it. I'm going to taste it, but I'm not going to eat it." And takes a couple of spoonfuls, splashes a little on the table, and maybe you can coax him to take a couple of more spoonfuls. And there's splashing of milk and maybe some cereal on the table. You're going to ignore it. You're not going to have a confrontation about it because it doesn't matter. That's neutral behavior. Finally, they get out. You remind them to brush their teeth. They might not want to. You may have to check it over. Okay, out the door. Then we have the fourth category, zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is minimal behaviors. You can count them on one hand. 4, maybe 5 behaviors for which you have zero tolerance. And these are biggies. "My child will never run into the street in traffic." That's a zero tolerance. No tolerance for that. When my child asks, "Can I play with the kitchen knives with my brother?" Zero tolerance. Never, never, never. "I'd like to give my sibling a haircut now. Can I have the scissors?" Never. There are certain zero tolerances, but they're minimal. All right, so we got the picture. Most of our behaviors are in the acceptable and the neutral, where we can ignore. So why did I bring up the ideal behavior? because we live in the realm of the ideal behavior. The ideal behavior is the standard by which we judge our child's behavior, whether it's acceptable or neutral. We judge it by the ideal standard that's buried away in the back of your mind and comes out at the most inopportune times, when you're disappointed, when you're frustrated, when you're having a situation with your child that is really making you very upset. When we start saying, she should know better. She should know not to fight with her baby sister. He should be able to put his shoes on by now. Whenever you hear yourself saying that word, my child should, check yourself. Check yourself. Monitor where that's coming from. Is that a realistic expectation, or is that a trip into the fantasy world of ideal behavior? Because more often than not, you're going into ideal behavior, which is a world with impossible standards. Our children cannot live up to those ideal standards. They're real kids. They're not ideal kids. They are not perfect kids, and you are not a perfect parent. We're all acceptable. Acceptable children, acceptable parents, working as hard as we can to get it right as often as we can, and move on. So if you have any questions on this, please put it in the chat. Put those questions right in the chat now, and we will deal with them in a little while. So the last slide is feelings versus behavior. We're going to talk a little more about feelings and behavior. So the first thing is to accept, understand, and explain feelings to the child. So you accept. You do not take on. Remember before I said, do not assume the emotions of your child. Do not take them on. So I'm saying this again, do not take on those feelings, those emotions. Do not react to those feelings or emotions in an emotional way. Do not deny the child's sense that this is how I feel. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. And don't diminish them. Accept them. Okay, so that's how you're feeling. Yeah, I can see you feeling a little angry. Yeah, that happens. Understand. Be the understanding parent, not the corrective parent. You're dealing with an emotional moment. Do not try to correct a feeling. A feeling is neither good nor bad. It just is. Feelings are acceptable. And young children, the younger the child is, the more they need to understand their feelings. The more a 2-year-old having a complete meltdown is absolutely convinced in his or her mind, this is it for the rest of my life. I'm doing this the rest of my life. There's no coming out of this. So you accept those feelings as being overwhelming for some children. So number 2 is place limits and rules on behaviors, not on feelings. Not on feelings. Let me just digress a moment, because I hear this from a lot of parents. When your child will at some point say, I hate you, or I hate grandma, and come out with really powerful. And you're going to want to say, you do not hate grandma, you do not hate me, or you can't say that, or that's a bad word, whatever you want to say. Try to not engage. Try to say, that's a hurtful word. It hurts people when you say that word. And in this home, in this family, we don't hurt each other. And that's how you get around those words. We don't hurt each other. And that is a hurting word. Okay? But you're not denying the feeling. You're explaining that feeling. And you're saying the behavior, which is yelling it out, is not acceptable. All right. So replacing limits and rules on behavior. What kind of rules? What kind of limits? Well, you're the parent. I'm not going to set rules in your house. I'm not going to put limits on behavior in your house. You're going to do that. And you're going to do it quite efficiently and effectively, because you're going to keep in mind, what is fair to my child? Not what does my child think is fair. That's a lose-lose proposition, because the only thing your child feels is fair or thinks is fair is that you give your child exactly what he or she wants, exactly when he or she wants it. And that's the immediate gratification that somebody mentioned in the beginning. So it's got to be fair to you. You're an adult. You have the maturity. You have the experience to determine what is fair for my child right now in terms of limits and rules on his or her behavior. And then this is the biggie. This is the biggie. Whatever rule, whatever limit you lay down, you've got to be able to enforce it. If you can't enforce it, it goes out the window. And you end up saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Your rules, the limits you place on your child's behavior, have to be, in your mind, fair to the child or to the children. And it has to be enforced by you. You have to be able to follow through on what you've said. Because if not, the child will never believe you. Follow through or demand a do-over. Listen, I misspoke. I didn't mean that if you ever did that again, I was going to break both of your legs. And I know it sounds terrible, but I've heard this from parents as a threat. So don't go there. Create rules, create limits, enforce them. Follow through. And if you can't, state it. Don't try to hide it under the rug. State it. You know, that rule of going to bed at 7 o'clock every night is our rule. And we do that all the time. But tonight we're watching a special Disney special on television. So I'm going to say tonight is an exception to the rule. Good words to get your children to know. This is an exception to the rule. We usually go to bed at 7, but tonight is an exception. We're going to go to bed after the Disney special so that you're covering all bases. You're not giving in on what the rules are. You're not giving it to the child watching a special on television. You are acknowledging that you're still in charge. You're still in charge, and you are creating an exception to the rule. And number 3 is anger is not aggression. And that's what we're really scared of. When we see our kids get angry, we immediately equate it with aggressive behavior. 2 different things. Anger is a feeling. It's an emotion. It's a very powerful emotion. It's an emotion that most adults are not equipped to handle because we have not had the experience and the training of dealing with anger. Anger in ourselves, anger in other adults, or anger in children. More often than not, we respond in kind. We get angry. And I already said, never a good idea with a child. So let's understand that anger is just another emotion. And we handle it the way we handle other feelings. We accept it. We do not take it on. We do not react emotionally. We do not deny. We do not diminish it. We say, wow, kiddo, you are really angry. I can see how angry you are. I bet that feels, are you feeling a little frustrated too? Are you feeling a little that frustrated that you can't have what you want? Because that can make you angry sometimes. And you see how I'm just having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with a child about their feeling of anger. I am not assuming it's going to devolve into aggression. Aggression means that they're hitting you. Never a good idea. It means that they're throwing things. Never a good idea. It means they're breaking their toys. Never a good idea. It means they're pummeling their siblings. Never a good idea. That is behavior. Remember, behavior needs limits and it needs rules. Feelings need acceptance and understanding. Differentiate. Differentiate, my friends. It is vitally important that your children know the difference between feelings and behavior. Okay, that's it for today. Just let me recap with one thing before we take questions. There are so many things in today's world that are out of control, out of our control, that we cannot do anything about. But the one thing we can do, and the one most important thing that we can do, is help our children, deal with their feelings, deal with their anger, learn how to wait and to stop and to listen, learn how to compromise, and to grow into someone that both of you can be proud of. That's my dog. Shush. My dog is like most children, unruly at times. Unruly. Okay, so let's take some questions. Let me just touch that. Next week, we're going to be talking about literacy and some strategies to help your child not learn how to read, not learn how to write, but want to learn how to read and want to write. So we're dealing with developing curiosity and creating some strategies and some activities so the kids want to learn how to read. They're excited about it. Okay, let's take some questions. Karen, you got some questions for me?
Yes, actually, there is a couple of questions coming through. The first one is, here's a good one. When does egocentric behavior can be expected to change?
Oh, I don't know. I've got some friends that are still dealing with it. I've got some adults that are dealing with egocentric behavior. We call it narcissism when it gets to a certain age. Egocentricity, usually, child egocentricity usually starts waning around 7 years old. Okay, then 6, 7, 8, they start taking on another person's perspective. And until they can see another person's perspective, they believe that theirs is the only one. You ask a 4-year-old, you tell a 4-year-old, well, it's my opinion. My opinion is different. They don't know. You're talking a different language. They don't get it. There's no such thing as another opinion. My opinion is the only opinion. So you're risking running into a conflict with a child if you try to convince them that someone else has a different opinion until they are developmentally ready. And by this, what I really mean is that their brain has made the sufficient number of connections for them to think in a more mature way. Okay, so if we expect our children to think in a more mature way before their brain has developed, good question. How does the brain develop? How can we help the brain develop? By giving them concrete experiences in their lives that will help the brain form the synapses, the connections that will enable them to mature their brain. And as I said, I know some adults still egocentric. Okay, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
All righty, okay. Next question. Do you have any more questions? Tantrums. We had somebody talk about tantrums. Last week, I spoke about the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. A tantrum, as that parent, and forgive me for forgetting which parent it was, but I recall that it was said. Tantrums are generally behavioral. I want something. I have figured out that if I throw a tantrum, I can usually get what I want. A meltdown is usually because of sensory overload. Child cannot handle it. No matter what you say to this child, it's not going to help. If a child is having a behavioral tantrum, you can try reasoning that child out of it. If a child is having emotional meltdown, what you need to do is empathize, sympathize, and wait with great compassion and great patience and great love. And it's times like this, when your child is having an emotional meltdown, that we need to find our reserves, our store of how much we really love this child. And I always say to parents, when you feel your child is bringing out the worst in you, and you know what those times are, I don't have to tell you, that is the time to take a deep breath and say, but wait a minute, I love this kid. I love this kid. I want the best for this kid. And this kid right now is having a really hard time obeying, listening, following directions, being nice to a sibling, you name it. The child is having a hard time. You don't have to have a hard time with him or her. You need to look at that child and say, how can I help this child? Not give in to the child. And a term that I have coined, it's not giving in, it's giving way. It's giving a child a way to express those feelings, not giving in to the child and just allowing the child to do whatever they want. So it's giving a child a way to express feelings, a way to feel empowered, a way to feel better about an decision. Because I guarantee you, the minute the child starts feeling better, you will start feeling better. And the reverse works as well. The minute you start feeling calm and in charge, the child will say, thank goodness, someone's in charge. It's not all up to me. And this is a real reason why many children have meltdowns, because they feel their parent, some parents are very permissive. And, you know, we're going to talk about permissiveness in one of these talks and the different kinds of parenting. But a permissive parent is like a disengaged parent. It's like, whatever you want, kid, it's good, because I want you to go free as a bird. Children don't get it. Children need to have some constraints. Children need to be taught what is okay and what is not okay. They don't feel comfortable without any limits, without any rules, without any guidelines. So we have to establish these for them. And we have to step in when the child cannot do that for himself. And it's all about teaching self-control to the child.